The wind howled fiercely as it rushed down from the hills, tearing through Riverbend Creek like a pack of famished wolves. It roared over the rooftops, shaking the shutters of the one-room schoolhouse and sneaking icy fingers under the door where Miss Emily Carrington stood without a coat, her breath visible in the cold air as her eyes searched the empty road. The children had all left an hour before, stomping through the snow in pairs or threes, their wool scarves wrapped tightly and mittens dragging behind them. Emily had stayed back to clean the chalkboard, but to be honest, it was mostly to avoid the walk back to her cabin. That small house was filled only with silence and memories she was not ready to face. 6 months a widow, 3 months without pay, and just one severe snowstorm away from being forgotten, Emily drew her shawl tighter and stepped outside. Her boots sank into the snow nearly up to her knees, the wind biting her cheeks and her lips cracked and raw. Each step toward the edge of town felt heavier than the one before. The lantern she held flickered in defiance, casting long, wavering shadows across the snow-covered ground. "Stubborn as your husband was, and perhaps even more," old Mrs. Carter had said when Emily refused help from the churchwomen last week, but Emily no longer cared. She buried her pride when she laid Thomas to rest. All that remained now was the promise she had made to keep the school open, to teach the children of Riverbend even if the entire world froze solid. And tonight, it had come terribly close to doing just that. She arrived at her cabin with her fingers frozen, fumbling twice before the key finally turned in the lock. Inside, the chill remained unchanged. The hearth lay cold and unlit, the last of her firewood having been used up the previous evening. She illuminated the single lamp beside the window and let her bag fall beside the door. Thomas's coat still hung there, untouched, a silent tribute to the man who had ventured into the storm in search of help and never returned. Emily sank into the rocking chair, unwrapped her scarf, and gazed at the vacant fireplace. It was not hunger that knotted her stomach, but the oppressive silence that filled the room. Then came a knock, making her startle as a thick breath caught in her throat. A firm rap sounded on her door amidst the raging snowstorm. "Miss Carrington," a deep voice spoke through the wood. She rose slowly, fingers brushing the pistol resting on the mantel. "Who is it?" she asked. "Roy from South Ridge," came the answer. Emily hesitated. Everyone knew the name. The owner of Roy Cattle Company, a war veteran who lived alone in the hills with more horses than friends. He had been in town the previous month to speak at the church about trail routes and disputes over barbed wire. Cold-eyed and upright, he was trouble incarnate. "What do you want?" she asked. "Firewood," he replied simply, "and a decent meal if you have it." Her hand released the pistol. "I don't have much," she said softly. He gave no response. When she opened the door, there he stood framed against the storm, his hat dusted with snow, his coat heavy with ice, one arm carrying a canvas sack filled with chopped wood. "I heard about your situation," he said. "I didn't come to feel sorry for you. I just thought maybe we could support one another." Emily did not reply. She simply moved aside and allowed him to enter. He stacked the firewood near the hearth silently, then pulled some kindling from his bag and knelt down, lighting a match with skill. The flames caught, gradually glowing softly with an orange hue in the darkness. She remained a few steps away, arms folded, observing. "You have been watching the schoolhouse," she stated flatly. Every morning this whole week, he was not attempting to hide it, why he avoided looking at her, wanted to see how long you would endure. Emily tensed. "I do not need a rescuer. I never said you did." He glanced up then, and in the flickering firelight, his face softened just a bit. "But I understand what it means to try holding the world together while carrying frost in your bones." The quiet between them stretched on. The fire crackled warmer now, throwing golden light across the bare wooden floor. Why now, she questioned. Why come this evening? He settled back on his heels. Because a storm is approaching that will engulf this entire valley if no one steps in. And because if you allow me, I would rather not witness a good woman perish for the sake of her pride. Her throat tightened. "You do not know me, not yet." Later they ate the little she had remaining, stale bread and thin broth. Carter did not complain, nor did he offer to replace it. He simply sat near the fire, recounting tales of cattle trails and wolves in the distant hills, about losing a brother to war and a wife to fever. She did not share anything yet. Somehow he appeared to comprehend the situation. When he rose to leave, he abandoned half the firewood by the hearth, along with a small bundle on the table containing flour, coffee, and a tiny portion of cheese. "I will return," he told them at the door. intending to check on the children and to see if your pride mattered to anyone. Emily did not respond, yet as she closed the door behind him, she noticed her hands had ceased trembling. Outside, the wind howled like a dying creature, while inside the flames glowed warmly and consistently. For the very first time in many weeks, Emily Carter allowed herself a glimmer of hope. The storm had not eased. In fact, it had intensified. Snow was driven sideways like sharp blades, accumulating heavily against the walls of the schoolhouse and the fences, creating eerie drifts. In town, doors remained firmly locked, windows covered with shutters, and no person dared venture out unless absolutely necessary. Emily Carter faced no alternative. Every morning she braved the cold walk to the schoolhouse with her coat fully buttoned and scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. Day by day, the number of children arriving dwindled. By Friday, only 3 stood shivering in the yard. Mary Goodwin, whose father had fractured his leg in the barn, Paulie Talbot, wearing his brother's old boots stuffed with paper to keep out the cold, and little Sadie Flynn, who had not spoken since her mother passed away the previous month. Emily gathered the children indoors, lit the remaining firewood, and tried to move forward. She taught them arithmetic by candlelight, clasped Sadie's hands in her own to keep them warm, and read aloud from a worn copy of Little Women as the wind shook the windows and walls. By midday the fire had extinguished. Her fingers ached from the cold, yet she persisted in reading. "I hold the key to my castle in the air," she murmured quietly, "but whether I can open the door is still uncertain." Her voice faltered as the door swung open once more. "School is closed," Carter Roy announced, stepping inside and shaking snow from his boots across the wooden floor. The children stared in silence. Polly blinked in surprise. Who gives permission like that? Carter removed his hat, flakes falling onto the floor. "Storm's changing. This place won't keep us safe." Emily slowly stood. "You cannot just barge in. Besides, I brought the wagon." He interrupted her with a hard gaze. "Blankets, hot water, space for 3. Emily crossed her arms firmly. "You will not take my students anywhere." "I've already informed their families." He motioned toward the door, his voice steady but resolute. "They know. They agreed." The children glanced between Emily and Carter. Paulie had already gathered his books. Emily positioned herself before the exit. "You should have consulted me, called me." Carter looked down. "I did 3 days ago. You just ignored me." Her pride swelled like a fierce wave, harsh and biting. "I am their teacher, and I am fighting to keep them alive." They held their gazes locked, the children momentarily forgotten. At last, Emily stepped aside. Once the children had left, Carter returned, once more uninvited and unwelcome. He stood in the center of the empty classroom, watching the frost spreading over the windows. "You are going to freeze here." "That cabin I can handle," he said slowly. "You won't, and you know it." Emily met his eyes, jaw clenched tight. "Then speak your mind and say what you came for." Crossing the room in 3 long steps, he set a folded sheet of paper on her desk. "A contract for room and board. You will teach the ranch hands' children until spring arrives." She blinked. "I already have a dozen kids spread across 3 counties, bright ones and wild as coyotes. They've traveled hours to reach town whenever they can write. I will build a classroom right at the ranch, warm, dry, and safe." Emily's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. His handwriting was precise and bold. The conditions were just and generous, even offering a place to live, a salary, and private quarters. Her throat tightened. "Why me?" "Because you didn't give up," he said plainly, "unlike everyone else, and because people trust you." She read the document once more. Carter's tone softened. "I am not giving you charity, Emily. I am proposing a partnership, something genuine, something valuable." She looked up and truly saw beyond the rough exterior, the firm jaw and cold eyes. Here was a man who had endured too much and lost deeply but still extended her refuge. It scared her. "I don't want to feel indebted to you." "You will not. I will respect your freedom. Naturally. And if I choose to leave come spring, then you will leave too." Emily placed the contract on the desk. "I will consider it," she said. Carter nodded, replacing his hat. "I will return in the morning." That night the wind howled through the eaves like a living beast. Emily sat beside the fire, contract in hand. Charles's coat rested undisturbed on her lap and hung on the hook near the door. She did not shed tears, not since the funeral. Yet she gazed intensely at the flickering flames and quietly spoke a single word into the stillness. Please, seeking warmth, mercy, and the opportunity she had not dared to hope for. Outside, the storm howled relentlessly, but dawn was inevitable. The heavy snow fell in dense layers, blurring the boundaries between earth and sky, between what was and what might be. For the first time in many weeks, Emily Carter felt warmth. She sat on the edge of a narrow bed, snug in a corner of what had once been the ranch's library. Now, it served as a provisional classroom, its walls lit by oil lamps, a slate board hanging between two windows, and 10 small desks crafted from reused crates. Carter had made a promise about the classroom and fulfilled it within only 2 days. He spoke little, but whenever he did, his words carried significance. Emily rose and moved closer to the fire, letting its heat enfold her like a comforting shawl. Nearby, a kettle whispered softly on the stove, filling the air with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. She gave herself a brief moment to exhale fully. Then came the sound of hooves striking the ground. A wagon clattered into the yard, and moments later the door flew open as snow and laughter spilled inside. Miss Carter greeted 10 children who entered eagerly, shaking snow from their hats, scarves, and boots that thudded against the wooden floor. The kids appeared younger than anticipated, ranging in age from 6 to 12, and their clothing, mostly patched, showed signs of hard living. Worn slate boards tucked securely under their arms, their eyes shone with excitement as they greeted her. Their curiosity was not about manners, but pure amazement. "Are you really a teacher?" a boy asked, his cheeks flushed pink from the cold. "I am," Emily responded, brushing snow off his shoulder. "My mother says you used to teach in town," a girl added before the blizzard grew stronger. "I still do," she said softly, "but in a different classroom." The children gathered closely, unsure where to settle. Emily indicated the desks. "You can sit wherever you want." They entered noisily, talking and laughing without fear or hesitation. Their presence seemed to push away the chill she had felt since Thomas passed. Picking up a piece of chalk, she said, "Let's get started." By midday, the classroom was full of life. Emily moved among the desks, answering questions, guiding small hands over their slates, and praising their efforts. She learned their names: Rosa, Joseph, May, Samuel, and the others. In them, she saw something long missing: hope. They were intelligent and eager. Some struggled to spell their own names, but could list every part of a saddle or count cattle in 3 different languages. When Emily asked them to draw something they loved, one child sketched the ranch house, another drew a mare with a crooked hoof. Rosa drew a picture of Emily standing by the blackboard with a fire glowing behind her. The portrait brought tears to Emily's eyes. At noon, Carter entered carrying a tray with bread, stew, and warm mugs of milk. The room settled in anticipation. The children stood silent, sensing something beyond just the man managing the ranch. To them, he was a legend. "Eat," he instructed, setting the tray down without fuss. "Thank you, Mr. Roy," Rosa replied softly. He gave a single nod and exited as quietly as he had arrived. Emily served the food in silence. The children ate greedily, and she noticed several silently sharing half of their bread with others. She did not eat. Her hunger was of a different kind. That evening, the children were sent home in sleds drawn by strong horses. Carter had thought of every detail. Emily stayed behind, wiping chalk from her hands when she heard a gentle knock at the door. He entered, brushing snow from his coat. "You made an impression," he said. They did too. He studied her for a moment, then to her surprise, he stepped forward and placed a carefully wrapped bundle on her desk. "A blanket," he explained. "Wool, hand-stitched. I have one now." "Do you?" Emily hesitated before reaching out to touch the fabric. It was thick, lined with cotton, decorated with delicate red roses embroidered against deep blue. "Your wife?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Catherine made these the winter before she passed." Emily's hand froze. "You keep her work in the classroom?" "She believed in warmth," he said simply, "even for strangers." A comfortable silence settled between them, measured and calm. "I should go," he said at last. Emily nodded. "Good night, Mr. Roy." He paused at the door. "You can call me Carter," he added. He did not answer, nor did he push the matter. After he departed, she wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and stood close to the fire. The aroma of smoke and snow blended with something older, perhaps sorrow or maybe a feeling beginning to mend. Later, As she reviewed papers by the lamp's flickering light, she discovered Rose's drawing once again. Emily surrounded by children smiling warmly in front of a fire. In the corner, the little girl had inscribed, "Our new teacher makes the cold disappear." Emily pressed the picture against her chest and closed her eyes. Maybe she could become that person. Perhaps, just perhaps, she already was. The snowfall finally ceased. In its place arrived a brittle, aching chill, the kind that seeps into bones and never fully leaves. The valley lay silent beneath its cover of white, and the skies were pale blue, sharp as glass. Smoke spiraled from chimneys, and icicles hung like knives from every rooftop. Inside the library-turned-classroom, the children peeled off their gloves and scarves with cheerful chatter. Emily welcomed them with a warm smile and mugs of tea, one of Mrs. Chen's additions to the school routine. The fire blazed brightly and the windows held fast. For the first time in a long time, everything felt right. That night, however, the storm came from within. It began with a cough. Emily had just finished sweeping when she heard it, harsh, deep, echoing from somewhere near the barn. She stepped outside, scarf wrapped tightly, and saw Carter doubled over beside the horse trough, one hand grasping the rail. "Mr. Roy," she called, her voice sharp. He slowly straightened. Breathing quickly, catching his breath, he said, "Just a cough." "You're bleeding," she stated calmly, narrowing her eyes as he wiped his mouth with his sleeve. A streak of red marked the wool. Carter winced. "I'm fine," he insisted, but Emily was already by his side, guiding him, half pulling him toward the main house. His body was warm, too warm, feverish. By the time they arrived in the parlor, he was trembling. "Sit," she commanded. "No arguments." He obeyed without protest. She tended the fire and brought a basin, wet cloths, and forced water between his lips. Carter tried to object, but she gave him the same look she had used on Polly Talbot when he misbehaved. "I have done this before," she said. "My husband got sick that last winter. I know what this is." Carter looked at her with fevered eyes. "You never talk about him." "No," she murmured softly. "I do not." Thomas Carrington had been a quiet man, skilled with horses and even better at silence. When the fever struck, it spread quickly, 3 days from the first cough to the last breath. Emily had spent that time at his side, trying every folk remedy the neighbors spoke of. Onion tea, camphor, boiled vinegar. Nothing helped. "I buried him with my own hands," she said now, pressing the cloth to Carter's forehead. "The ground was frozen. It took me all night." Carter said nothing. His eyes fluttered closed. "I promised myself I would never care again," Emily whispered, "because it always ends that way, in fire or frost. Always." Suddenly he reached up, gripping her wrist, not harshly but firmly. "I'm not him," he rasped. "I understand," and she did too, because when she gazed at Carter she did not see Thomas. She perceived a man who had endured many different storms, a man familiar with sorrow as she was with hunger. It was always present, quiet but persistent. He slowly slipped into sleep. Emily sat by his side, feeding logs into the fire, wiping sweat from his forehead, murmuring nonsense just to keep him connected to the present. She remained there all night. At sunrise, the fever finally broke. Carter opened his eyes, clearer now, and found her slumped in the chair beside him, her head resting on her folded arms. "Emily," he muttered, blinking, "you are awake." "I'm sorry," he croaked. "For what?" "For making you remember." She shook her head. "Some memories never fade, but you do not have to carry mine. You have plenty of your own." A pause passed between them before he quietly spoke again. "Carter died 5 winters ago. Fever claimed him too. He was strong and stubborn. He kept teaching at the mission school until he collapsed in the snow." Emily's breath caught. "I built this school for him," he said, "but I never opened it. I could not." "You did now?" "No." He turned to look at her. "You did." That afternoon the children brought drawings of snowmen, animals, and dreams. Rosa had drawn Emily once more, this time with Carter sitting beside her, a fire burning warmly between them. She smiled despite herself. Later in her room she discovered a package wrapped in burlap containing new boots, a pair of soft gloves, and a small book of poetry. There was no note, no signature, but she understood. She placed them carefully in the drawer beside her bed. A book lay beside Thomas's pocket watch, not as a substitute but as a symbol of something fresh. The thaw unfolded gradually, starting with drops falling from the eaves and the soft murmur of melting snow slipping off rooftops under the gentle late-morning sun. The paths transformed into firm mud rather than ice, and with the melting came visitors with curious glances and spreading rumors. By the time Emily arrived at the town's general store, the gossip was already ahead of her. "Did you hear?" Mrs. Felton murmured from behind a barrel of flour. "He has taken her in. That schoolteacher living in his house teaching his children." "She is not his children's mother," snapped Mrs. Weller as she folded linens, "and it is improper. She may not wear black anymore, but that says everything." Emily stood on the opposite side of the store shelf, her back straight and her fingers gripping tightly the strap of her basket. She remained silent. She did not have to say anything. Embarrassment flared fiercely beneath her skin, not because the accusation was entirely false, but because part of it was true. She was still his wife, still Thomas's widow. Yet when her eyes met Carter Roy's, she no longer felt like a widow, and that terrified her deeply. Returning to the ranch, she found Carter in the barn, his sleeves rolled up hay clinging to his shirt. He glanced up as she entered, his eyes instantly tightening at the flush on her cheeks. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied too quickly. He wiped his hands and stepped toward her, saying, "Talk." She struggled to hold his gaze. "They say I have stopped mourning that I have. They took your home and your identity without any compensation." Carter's jaw clenched firmly. Then he said, "Let's provide them with something truly meaningful to discuss." He reached inside his coat pocket and pulled out a neatly folded piece of paper. It was not a ring. Instead, it was a contract. Once again, she read it quietly. Her name appeared at the top and his at the bottom. The conditions were altered this time, marriage by law and by name, but also by mutual agreement. Her own room was guaranteed, along with full control over the school, absolute freedom beyond social expectations, and most importantly, no duties beyond what she willingly offered. "It will protect you," Carter said softly. "Your reputation, the school, the children, and yourself." She inquired, and he merely shrugged. "I have lived under constant observation since Catherine passed away. I am not doing this for myself." She paused, then whispered, "You have already provided me with food, shelter, and employment." "Now I want to give you my name," he replied. "I intend to give you a shield. The world can be harsh, Emily. This will make it hesitate." The marriage remained understated. No guests were invited and no rings exchanged. Just Reverend Whiteham at the ranch house with a Bible between them and Mrs. Chen as a witness. Emily wore a simple green dress, the only one not crafted for mourning. Carter gazed at her as if she were sunlight on snow. They exchanged vows and signed the documents. He did not touch her hand until the Reverend said, "You may kiss your bride." Even then, he merely brushed her cheek, yet Emily's heart ached with the significance of it. That night, she sat in her own room with the fire softly crackling, reflecting on the marriage. The certificate was carefully placed inside her drawer, next to the poetry book and Thomas's watch. Outside, snow fell gently and slowly. A soft knock came at her door. "Come in," she said. Carter stepped inside hesitantly. "I brought you something," he said, holding out a small pot filled with soil and roots barely beginning to bloom. It was a rose bush. She blinked in surprise. "It is not spring," she remarked. "No," he replied, "but I thought perhaps you were ready for something to grow." She accepted it with trembling hands. "I do not love you," she confessed suddenly. "I know. I do not know if I can," he responded. "I will wait." "Even if it never comes," he smiled faintly. Looking down at the rose, a single small bud was pushing through the cold earth. For the first time since Thomas's passing, she longed for something more. On a Wednesday, the very first crocus broke through the snow outside the classroom window. Its bright purple stood out against the white, fragile yet unyielding. She smiled and touched her belly absent-mindedly. The baby was not expected for another month, but life in the valley had a habit of arriving early. The children had noticed her changes long before she spoke a word. Rosa was the first to ask, eyes wide and voice gentle, "Is there a baby in there, Miss Emily?" Samuel followed with, "Does that mean Mr. Roy is your real husband now?" Emily laughed then, feeling a mix of nervousness and sadness. "He always was," she said. "I just did not know it yet." On the day the flowers bloomed, Carter came back from town carrying 2 crates, one filled with school supplies, the other with spring seedlings. They were ready for something new to begin. "You have them," he said, as he placed the items on the porch. "If you want them, I do." He offered no more words, simply nodded and turned away to tend the horses, but she trailed after him. "Call her," he said, sunlight catching his hair, which looked lighter now than it had during winter, softer. She inhaled deeply. "I've been holding your name in my heart for nearly 2 months now. I think it's time I stop pretending it doesn't matter." His brow creased. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." Her voice trembled. "I never thought I could. Not after Thomas, but you." Her voice faltered completely. He closed the distance between them, cradled her face gently as if it were something precious. "Say it again." "I love you," called Roy. His lips met hers, tentative but tender, and the kiss was so different from anything they had agreed upon. It embodied everything their silence had been building toward: months of silent suffering, quiet glances, unspoken care. It was a thaw, a blossoming. When they parted, Emily rested her forehead against his chest and laughed quietly. "And here I thought I was the one teaching the lessons," he laughed softly. "Looks like we're both learning." That evening, Carter moved the rose bush into their room. It had 3 buds now. One bloomed beneath the lamp's soft glow, its delicate petals unfolding to reveal a bright red flower. "Catherine nurtured winter roses," Carter murmured. "I thought they were impossible to keep alive." Emily smiled. "Maybe they just needed the right hands." The child arrived on a warm morning in late April. Rosa hurried to summon the doctor while Mrs. Chen arranged water and blankets. Carter remained steadfast by Emily's side, his hand clasping hers through every cry, every breath, every beat of her heart. When their son finally arrived, his face flushed, crying out with vibrant life, Emily was overcome with emotion. They named him Thomas James Roy, Thomas in remembrance, James symbolizing strength, and a Roy for home. The first bell of the spring semester rang through Riverbend a week later. Children poured into the schoolhouse, their laughter resounding through the valley. Emily rested on the porch, the baby cradled gently in her arms. She wrapped her arm around her shoulders. A new school year signified a new beginning, a fresh chapter, a different season. She placed a tender kiss on their son's forehead and softly whispered, "You were born of winter, but you are made of spring." She returned her gaze, voice hushed and full of meaning. "I told you I would wait." He smiled back, saying, "And I promised you it was worth it." So, across these relentless lands, another story drifts away with the breeze. If this quiet bravery, this unwavering heart moved you even a little, leave a like, share your thoughts below, and pass this tale to someone who needs it. Remember to subscribe, because out here many truths still remain to be told, each one shaped from pain, hope, and dust. This is Frontier Stories. Thank you for watching.